Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulil kareem, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam tasliman kathira. So the next companion is very surprising to some people because just like, Isa alayhi salam and Musa alayhi salam are not always portrayed accurately in Christian movies and Jewish movies. Likewise, in some of our movies, the Sahaba are not portrayed accurately. And this companion is Zayd ibn Haritha, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Zayd ibn Haritha, if you guys have watched the movie The Message, does not look like he does in the movie The Message and in many of the Islamic series and so on and so forth. But Zayd ibn Haritha radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he is 10 years younger than the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So similar to the same as Bilal radiallahu anhu, basically, born in the year 580. He's described by Ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah as short, flat-nosed, very dark skin. So that's his physical appearance. Now, Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu was from Banu Kalb, which is an Arab tribe. So Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu is considered a black Arab then. And Zayd's mother, her name was Su'ada bin Tha'laba. Su'ada bin Tha'laba was from the tribe known as Tai tribe. Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu, when he was a young boy, he used to accompany his mother, his father on different journeys. And his story really, starts off with tragedy. He's accompanying his mother one day on a visit to her family. They're going to visit her family, and while they were sleeping, he was kidnapped by Banu Ma'an, by a group of bandits from Banu Ma'an. And he's still a very, very young child, and as he's kidnapped, he's taken to the very famous Suq al-Uqadh. And Suq al-Uqadh, by the way, is like where everything happens in Mecca at that time, Suq al-Uqadh. So he's taken to Suq al-Uqadh and he's sold into slavery for 400 dirhams. So he's kidnapped, sold, basically overnight, and his family goes on this long search for him, and they can't find him for years and years and years. And his father, Haritha ibn Sharahil, he used to actually, grieve over him and write poetry about him and talk about how much he missed him, and he would frequently leave his work early due to his weeping for him. So it's really a tragic story, subhanallah. The famous poem that he wrote for Zayd radiallahu anhu, he used to say, بكيت على زيد ولم أدري ما فعل أحي فيرجى أم أتى دونه الأجل فوالله ما أدري وإني لسائل أغالك بعد السهل أم غالك الجبل. Which means that I cried over Zayd, not knowing what became of him. Is he alive, and is there any hope for him, or has death overcome him? By Allah I ask it, I do not comprehend. Was it on flat ground that you died, or a mountain that brought you to your end? So subhanallah, he's just weeping and crying over his son all of this time, not knowing what happened to him for years. And he never gives up hope in finding him, subhanallah, for all of these years. Now the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the decree of Allah, is that when Zayd was sold at Suq al-Uqadh, he was bought by Hakim ibn Hizam. And Hakim ibn Hizam radiallahu anhu has two very famous distinctions. Number one, he's the nephew of Khadija bint Khuwaylid radiallahu anha. Number two, he is the only person we know of that was born in the Kaaba. So his mother actually gave birth to him in the Kaaba. He became Muslim later on in his life, radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And Zayd becomes his slave. And whenever, when he met Khadija radiallahu anha with Zayd, Khadija radiallahu anha took particular interest in Zayd. She saw this, beautiful young boy. And Hakim ibn Hizam gifted Zayd to Khadija radiallahu anha. So she goes into the house of Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha as a slave, and when she marries Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, she gives Zayd as a gift to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Zayd is technically a slave of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam now. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam became extremely attached to Zayd. Okay? He loves Zayd. This is way before Islam, We're talking years and years and years, and this shows you the compassion in the heart of the Prophet ﷺ as well, how he doesn't have any of this racism in his heart or these distinctions in his heart. It was to the point that no one called him the slave of the Prophet ﷺ. Instead, they called him Hibbu Rasulillahi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which means the beloved one of the Prophet ﷺ. So his nickname becomes the beloved one of the Prophet ﷺ. So he used to follow the Prophet ﷺ around. He's not much younger than the Prophet ﷺ, 10 years younger than the Messenger ﷺ. Used to follow him around. He used to work with the Prophet ﷺ. He used to help him as he was a shepherd and so on and so forth. And Banu Kalb, his original tribe, they see him years after he was kidnapped, still in the time of Jahiliyyah. And they see him in the time of Hajj with the Prophet ﷺ. So some of his tribe recognized him, and they went back to his father. And we're talking decades later to tell his father that they found Zayd. So when Zayd's father found out Haritha, he immediately set out for Mecca. He asked where he was, and they directed him to the house of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And when they found the Prophet ﷺ, they said that we will give you anything for Zayd, any ransom, any money that you want, anything that you want for Zayd. So the Prophet ﷺ, obviously he loves Zayd, but Rasulullah ﷺ is not going to dictate this upon the family. So he calls for Zayd. And Zayd comes, and the Prophet ﷺ, he says that, this is your father, this is your family. They're here to get you. And the Prophet ﷺ said that he would release him without taking any money. So there was no need for a ransom, no need for any payment. Just take him, basically. Zayd, when he saw his father and his uncle, he was emotional. He was happy to see them. But when the Prophet ﷺ told him, Zayd, you can go now with your father and your uncle, Zayd said, Bal uqimu ma'ak. Said, no, I want to stay with you. And the father of Zayd, Haritha, you can imagine, he's been looking for him all these years, and his son is a slave. He says to him, Ya Zayd, أتختار العبودية على الحرية وعلى أبيك وأمك وبلدك وقومك? Are you going to choose slavery over freedom and prefer being a slave to your father, your mother, your country, your people, your city, your people? And listen, subhanAllah, Zayd says to his father, and this is before prophethood, Zayd says, إني قد رأيت من هذا الرجل شيئا وما أنا بالذي أفارقه أبدا. He said, look, I've seen something special in this man, and I'm not going to be the one to part ways with him. So if he wants to give me away, if he wants to sell me, I understand, but I will not part ways with him. When that happened, the Prophet ﷺ, he took Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu by the hand to the steps of the Kaaba. And back then they used to witness the contracts and so on and so forth at the steps of the Kaaba. And Rasulullah ﷺ, he took the hand of Zayd and he said to everyone, Ishhadu anna hadha ibni warithan wa mawruth. Said, everyone bear witness that this is my son. Warithan wa mawruth. He inherits, he is just like any one of my children. Now when he did that, Zayd radiallahu anhu's father and his uncle Haritha was actually satisfied. He was actually happy. Okay, that Zayd was going to be living well, and he was freed, and he was going to live like anyone else. And that's one thing about the Arabs, is that they would honor their oaths back then. So he knew that the Prophet ﷺ was going to honor that oath, and that at least his son was going to live well. He's living with a noble man. He's living in the house of Khadija radiallahu anha, a noble woman. And so Al-Haritha and his brother, they were satisfied, and they returned home without him. After that, Zayd was known as Zayd ibn Muhammad, and he was a freed man, and he was regarded in every way the son of Rasulullah ﷺ. So he was Zayd ibn Muhammad for even the majority of Islam, the period of Islam, until later on, which we'll talk about. Now, most of the Muhajirin, when they went to Mecca, most of the Muhajirin, they were paired off with Ansar, with people of Medina. When they migrated to Medina, most of the people of Mecca were paired off with the people of Medina. But Zayd radiallahu anhu was paired with someone very special. He was paired with Hamza radiallahu anhu. So Zayd and Hamza were brothers. They lived together when they made hijrah to Medina. And Hamza radiallahu anhu, in fact, he entrusted Zayd with his wasiyah. So his will, his testament was with Zayd when he was martyred in Uhud radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So Zayd has a special position with the Prophet ﷺ, with Hamza. Obviously Zayd accepts Islam very early on. He's one of the first to accept Islam, with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's the only one to go out with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Ta'if. So he accompanies the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Ta'if. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he married Zayd to Zainab bint Jahsh. And in the Mothers of the Believers series, we talk in detail about what happened with that marriage. But to make matters short, the Prophet ﷺ marries Zayd to Zainab, who is of the most noble lineage of Quraysh, because the Prophet ﷺ is trying to eliminate, as Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah says, elitism and classism from the equation of marriage. So the Prophet ﷺ takes someone who comes from a very humble background of slavery, and he marries him to Zainab with that intention of eliminating that status. And obviously, again, we talk about this in the Mothers of the Believers class, but that marriage did not work out. The Prophet ﷺ himself ends up marrying Zainab, and through that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala eliminates at-tabanni, tabanni is unfortunately sometimes mistranslated as adoption. Okay? Foster care, adoption, these are things that are very praiseworthy in our religion. The only thing that changes is that he's not Zayd ibn Muhammad, he's Zayd ibn al-Haritha. All right, so you don't rob a child of their identity. They maintain their identity, though they have all the rights. I mean, they still are treated with love and with care and compassion. And the Prophet ﷺ mentions, I am the one who takes care of an orphan, or like these two fingers in Jannah. So that's the only thing that changes from a technical perspective. Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he also was married to Hind bint al-Awwam. Now Hind bint al-Awwam is a niece of Khadija, and also Kulthum bint Uqba, who is the maternal sister of Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So this shows you that Zayd was treated completely like a free man in society. He wasn't treated any differently because of his legal status, because he was a former slave, or because of his skin color. Now, his most special, the most special marriage of Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu was to Ayman radiallahu anha. And we'll talk about that inshallah ta'ala in a little bit, inshallah. We'll actually leave that from Ayman herself. But that's the most special marriage of Zayd. But again, the Prophet ﷺ integrated him in society in every way possible. Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu was the first in command during the famous battle of Mu'tah. And in Mu'tah, Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu was killed. And the Prophet ﷺ, he wept over Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu, very much so. He loved Zayd. And Rasulullah ﷺ appointed his son Usama ibn Zayd to be the head of the army after the death of Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu. His distinction, he is the only companion of the Prophet ﷺ mentioned by name in the Quran. Okay, so you talk about black and noble or whatever it is. I mean, the only one who has that mark of having his name said in the Quran, where we will always say Zayd, 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 right, is this man Zayd ibn Haritha radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Now he was like the son of the Prophet ﷺ. Who would he end up marrying? The woman who the Prophet ﷺ would call like his mother. And there is a very interesting story behind that. This woman, Ayman radiallahu ta'ala anha, Baraka bint Tha'laba. Her name is Baraka bint Tha'laba. Her kunya is Ayman. She was born in the year 557. So she's older than the Prophet ﷺ, about 13 years older than the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the Prophet ﷺ used to call her my mom after my mom. Ummi ba'da ummi. My mom after my mom. Okay? Who is she and what is her story? She was an Abyssinian slave, and she was also purchased in the same souk, the same marketplace as Zayd. Souk al-Uqath. And she was purchased by Abdullah ibn Abdul Muttalib. Who is Abdullah ibn Abdul Muttalib? The father of the Prophet ﷺ, right? So she's purchased by the father of the Prophet ﷺ. And when Abdullah set out to Sham, she was the one that stayed with Amina, the mother of the Prophet ﷺ, throughout her pregnancy. She was the only one who was with Amina as she was holding the Prophet ﷺ in her stomach, in her womb. And she was the one that heard the news of Abdullah, the father of the Prophet ﷺ, dying on his trade route. And she was the one that had to convey that news to the mother of the Prophet ﷺ. And she was the one who received the Prophet ﷺ in her hands when he was born, alayhi salatu wasalam. So subhanAllah, this is great distinction. She's the one to go out and announce to the city that Rasulullah ﷺ was born. She's the one that goes to the house of Abu Lahab and tells him about the nur, the light that came from the womb of Amina as she gave birth to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And when Amina died, she was the one that was there for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When Abdul Muttalib died, she was the one that was there for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She literally stayed with the Messenger ﷺ his entire life up until he married Khadija radiallahu anha. And this is beautiful because she refused to get married until the Prophet ﷺ got married. You talk about motherly instinct. She refused to get married until he got married. And when he got married to Khadija radiallahu anha, she still stayed unmarried until the Prophet ﷺ insisted, and she finally got married. So this woman insisted on being the mother of the Prophet ﷺ. She immediately believed in him. She used to follow him in each one of his battles, each one of the expeditions. She used to keep her eye on him the entire time during the battles. And subhanAllah, the Prophet ﷺ saw her on during the hijrah. When she made hijrah, she had swollen feet, she had dust all over her face. And the Prophet ﷺ says, Ya Ummi, kayfa haluki, how are you? And he said to her, indeed, for you is a place in Jannah. I guarantee for you a place in Jannah. And subhanAllah, this is beautiful that the Prophet ﷺ gave her that bushra in her life. So she's one of the mubashirat, right, of Al-Jannah, those that were given the glad tidings of Jannah. Rasulullah ﷺ initially married her to a man by the name of Ubayd ibn Zayd. And Ubayd ibn Zayd was from Medina, from the Khazraj tribe of Medina. And that's how she had her son Ayman. So that's when she becomes Ayman, is when she has that child from Ubayd ibn Zayd. Now, after her husband passes away, after Ubayd ibn Zayd passes away, and it's unclear when he passed away, but it was definitely in the Madani phase, probably somewhere in the middle. Rasulullah ﷺ comes out and he says, who wants to marry a woman of Jannah? That's how the Prophet ﷺ presents this woman. Who wants to marry a woman of Jannah? Now, Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu, even though he's already married, and even though he's 23 years younger than her, Zayd says, I want to marry her. So the Prophet ﷺ says, are you sure? He says, yes, I'm sure. So Rasulullah ﷺ, he marries, subhanAllah, the woman who was black that received him. The first woman to hold the Prophet ﷺ was an Abyssinian woman. The boy that the Prophet ﷺ called his son was, a black Arab. And the Prophet ﷺ marries these two together. SubhanAllah. And they had Usama ibn Zayd radiallahu ta'ala anhu, the first commander of the Muslim army after the death of the Prophet ﷺ. So this is a woman that's very special. One of the things that's special about her, when the Prophet ﷺ used to see her, of course, Rasulullah ﷺ kept calling her Ummi, my mother. And he asked her once, how are you? And she used to say, Ma dama al-Islamu bi khair fa ana bi khair. Ya Rasulullah, as long as Islam is good, I'm good. Ma dama al-Islamu bi khair, ana bi khair. I want nothing except for the goodness of Islam. SubhanAllah, she was a completely selfless lady. And look at what she witnesses in her life. She witnessed the death of her son Ayman, her only son from her first husband Ayman. He was martyred in the Battle of Hunayn. So Ayman al-Habashi, her son, was martyred in the Battle of Hunayn. She already witnessed the death of her husband. She witnessed the death of her husband Zayd in the Battle of Mu'tah. She witnessed the death of the man that she used to call her son, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then she even witnessed the death of her son Usama ibn Zayd radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. So Ayman radiallahu anha literally witnessed in her lifetime the death of everyone that she loved. Throughout her life is a life of watching the people that she loves pass away. Her, Amina, Abdul Muttalib, then with the Prophet ﷺ, then with her husband, both of her husbands, then with both of her children. SubhanAllah, she has witnessed tragedy in every way possible. Now this woman was considered it was considered a sunnah to visit her. And that's beautiful because the Prophet ﷺ used to visit her, so it was an established sunnah amongst the Sahaba to go and visit this woman. And so Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu narrates the famous story of Abu Bakr and Omar going to visit her. And what amazing guests, what noble guests. Abu Bakr and Omar coming to visit you. And Anas says that they used to go visit her as the Prophet ﷺ used to go visit her. So Abu Bakr and Omar, it was part of their routine to go and visit Ayman radiallahu ta'ala anha. And they didn't want her to miss the Prophet ﷺ too much. So they wanted to sit with her and they wanted to remember the Prophet ﷺ, but they also wanted to lighten the burden for her. And so they sat with her and they started to go through the memories of him, and she started crying. And Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu said, don't cry, because don't you know that what Allah has for the Prophet ﷺ is better than what we have for him? And she said, Wallahi, I'm not crying over the fate of Rasulullah ﷺ, but she says, I'm crying because لأن الوحي قد انقطع من السماء, because the revelation has ceased to come from the heavens. So I'm crying because of the disconnect of the Quran. The Quran stopped being revealed. So this is a woman that tied all of her happiness to the religion. Rasulullah ﷺ says, Ummi ba'da ummi hiya baqayatu ahli. She is my mother after my mother, and she's the rest of my family. She's my entire family. So subhanAllah, just to recap here, the boy that the Prophet ﷺ adopted, okay, and affectionately called his son, the woman that he would call his mother, were both black. Right? And this is really a powerful this is a powerful testimony to the attitude that the Prophet ﷺ had towards race. Right? Then we find with Usama radiallahu ta'ala anhu, Usama, who's the son of Zayd and Ayman. And Imam Abu Dawood, he says, كان أسامة أسود شديد السواد مثل القار. That Usama was of the darkest skin color, like tar. Qar is tar. He was of the darkest skin color. Rasulullah ﷺ, there are numerous ahadith where you find Al-Hasan, wal-Husayn, wa Usama ibn Zayd. So the Prophet ﷺ used to play with him the same way that he would play with Al-Hasan wal-Husayn. Who did the Prophet ﷺ marry him to? He married him to Fatima bint Qais, one of the most noble women of Quraysh. So the Prophet ﷺ did away with that. And he was appointed as the commander of the army at the age of 17 years old. Now think about that. 17 years old, and he's going to lead a caravan. He's going to lead the entire Muslim army. That includes Khalid, Abu Usama, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, Omar. Some of the greatest Sahaba, the greatest warriors amongst the companions, they're going to be led by a 17-year-old. So some of them complained to Omar radiallahu anhu to go complain to Abu Bakr to replace Usama because he was young. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he kept him at the order of the Prophet ﷺ. But there's something very subtle and something very beautiful, by the way, to point out here. That none of the Sahaba complained about the color of Usama. They were just worried about his age. They were worried about how young he was. So not a single companion came to Abu Bakr and said, we don't know if we're okay with this, the blackest person amongst us leading us. He's 17, which is a very valid concern. So are you sure we can do this? Now Abu Bakr stuck to the command of the Prophet ﷺ, and the tarbiyah had set into the Sahaba where they were accepting of this, where that they had become colorblind to this. And Usama did in fact defeat the Romans, so he was in fact successful as their leader. And as long as he lived, Usama was loved and he was respected by the Sahaba. They used to give him precedence over their own children. So we find Umar radiallahu anhu, when he became Khalifa, he used to give Usama a greater share than even his own children. So his son said to him, one of his kids said to him, why is it that you give Zayd more than us? And listen to what he said. He said, you are not better than him. Number one, huwa khayru mink, he's better than you. Number two, he said the Prophet ﷺ loved his father more than he loved your father. So he's saying the Prophet ﷺ loved Zayd more than he loved me, more than he loved Omar. That's a huge testimony. He said the Prophet ﷺ loved his father more than he loved his father, more than he loved your father, and he loved him more than he loved you, and he appointed him a commander over me. So three things he said about Usama. Number one, Rasulullah ﷺ loved his father more than he loved your father, i.e. Umar. Number two, he loved him more than he loved you. Okay, so Zayd more than the son of Umar. Number three, he appointed him as a commander over me, which is a great sign of his status. Radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Now there's another person now that comes up, and I said it, and how many times do you hear the name of Mihja'? That's a very odd name. You don't hear much about the name of Mihja'. But the Prophet ﷺ put him in the same category as Luqman al-Hakim and Bilal. So who is this Mihja' ibn Salih? Mihja' ibn Salih is a slave that Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu freed. But he stayed in the companionship of Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So Umar radiallahu anhu freed him, and he stayed with Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Al-Qurtubi narrates that this man was known for his ibadah, he was known for his worship, and he said he used to motivate Umar to worship. I mean, Umar doesn't need much to push him in Qiyamul Layl or Tahajjud, but he used to keep up with Umar al-Khattab in ibadah. And he used to worship like Umar radiallahu anhu and push him. And in fact, some of the Mufassirin, they say that the first ayat of Surah Al-Ankabut are about Mihja'. أَحَسِبَ النَّاسُ أَن يُتْرَكُوا أَن يَقُولُوا آمَنَّا وَهُمْ لَا يُفْتَنُونَ, that he was tested deeply. And also Surah Al-Kahf, وَلَا تَطْرُدِ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, don't turn away those who believe and seek the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So some of the scholars, they say that this is talking about Mihja'. Now, what makes Mihja' so special? Okay, Mihja' is the first shaheed of Badr. He's the first martyr of the Battle of Badr. And he was killed by a stray arrow from Amir ibn al-Hadrami. Amir ibn al-Hadrami. So Mihja' ibn Salih is the first shaheed of the Battle of Badr. We don't know much about him except that this was a man that used to stand with the likes of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu and push even Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu to ibadah. Then we have Al Yasir, the very blessed family, Al Yasir, the family of Yasir. Who are the family of Yasir? You have Yasir ibn Amir from Yemen, radiallahu anhu. Now Yasir ibn Amir is Yemeni, he's an Arab. He moved to Mecca when he was young, and he worked for Hudayfa ibn al-Mughira. And when he worked for Hudayfa ibn al-Mughira, this is before Islam, he married the slave of Hudayfa, who was Sumayya bint Khayyat. So Sumayya, the first martyr of Islam, the first Shahida of Islam, was an Abyssinian slave girl as well. So the first martyr of Islam is an Abyssinian as well. So Yasir radiallahu ta'ala anhu marries Sumayya radiallahu anha, and of course they give birth to Ammar ibn Yasir radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And this family was one of the first families to accept Islam, and obviously the families that really suffered the most were the poor families and the families that didn't have powerful tribes. So, obviously the slaves were tortured the worst. So when they became Muslim, Abu Jahl and Banu Mughira as a family, they used to torture them, they used to torture them daily. And the Prophet ﷺ, he used to walk by and cry, seeing the torture of Amir and, Yasir and Sumayya and Ammar. And the Prophet ﷺ used to say, Sabran ya ala Yasir, maw'idukum al-Jannah. Sabran ya ala Yasir, maw'idukum al-Jannah. That be patient, O family of Yasir, your appointed place is Jannah. Your place is Jannah. Be patient. Your place is Jannah. Rasulullah ﷺ could not do anything for them. He would hear them scream and go through the worst forms of torture. And Sumayya, radiallahu ta'ala anha, Abu Jahl was, was beating her, and he had the idol, and Sumayya spit on it, and she refused to stop saying La ilaha illallah, and she refused to accept the idols, and she refused to curse the Prophet ﷺ. And Abu Jahl, of course, mutilated her in one of the most horrific ways. So, subhanAllah, he actually took a spear and he stuck it through her midsection completely. And this woman is the first martyr of Islam. And then he killed Yasir, the husband of Sumayya radiallahu ta'ala anha, who became the first male martyr of Islam. And Ammar, after seeing his parents killed, and Abu Jahl is telling him to curse the Prophet ﷺ, he cursed the Prophet ﷺ just out of the moment, just to get out of that situation. And Ammar was ashamed. He hid from the Prophet ﷺ. He used to hide his face from the Messenger ﷺ. And Rasulullah ﷺ, he asked Ammar, he said, what's wrong with you? I see you hiding from me. I see you turning your face away from me. And Ammar, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he said, Ya Rasulullah, I cursed you. When they were torturing me, I cursed you. The Prophet ﷺ said, did you mean it with your heart or did you just say it with your tongue? Meaning you just said it under compulsion, right? And he said, yes. The Prophet ﷺ says, فَإِنْ عَادُوا فَعُدْ. If they do it to you again, then do it again. It's okay. It's okay. You're being tortured. It's okay to get yourself out of that situation. In عَادُوا فَعُدْ. If they do it to you again, then do it again. And Ammar becomes obviously very close to the Prophet ﷺ as well. And Ammar radiallahu ta'ala anhu was the one, when the Prophet ﷺ said, when fitna breaks out, look to the army in which Ammar is killed. And that army is the one with truth. And Ammar was fighting on the side of Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu on the day of the Battle of Siffin. And when Ammar radiallahu ta'ala anhu was killed in the army of Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, amongst the army of Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, then it was clear to the Muslims that the transgressing army, the Prophet ﷺ says, the transgressing army will kill Ammar. So it was clear that Ammar radiallahu ta'ala anhu was on the side of truth on that day. So the Prophet ﷺ, when he says that Ammar is on the side of truth, wherever it will be, subhanAllah, I mean, that's a great testimony to him as well. So the family of Yasir, the family of the first shuhada, also black, also from slave roots. Then we find others, and subhanAllah, I'm going through them as quickly as I can just to give you this idea, just to give you this overview of these people that were around the Prophet ﷺ. We find a great man by the name of Ubadah ibn Samit, Ubadah ibn Samit radiallahu anhu. And Ubadah ibn Samit radiallahu ta'ala anhu was one of the first Ansar of the Prophet ﷺ. He was very, very, very black, but also praised for his beauty and praised for his physical form. So Ubadah radiallahu anhu was a big guy, huge, built, muscular, and very impressive in his stature. And subhanAllah, this was a man that was something else in battle, right? Ubadah radiallahu anhu in the battlefield was something else. But he occupies many positions. One of them is that he's one of the people that the Prophet ﷺ honored to be from Kutab al-Wahi. So he's one of those that wrote down the Quran as it was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ. A very black man. He was married to a woman by the name of Haram bint Milhan. Haram radiallahu ta'ala anha is the maternal aunt of Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu. So she's the sister of Sulaim, the maternal aunt of Anas ibn Malik. And Haram has a beautiful story. The Prophet ﷺ was asleep in her house, and Rasulullah ﷺ, he woke up and he started laughing. Big smile on his face, and he started laughing. And Haram said, Ya Rasulullah, may Allah keep you laughing in this world and in the next. May Allah keep you happy in this world and the next. What did you see? So the Prophet ﷺ said, I saw a group from my ummah with crowns on their head, and they were traveling, they were spreading Islam by the sea. Meaning there were people from my ummah that were traveling by sea to spread Islam. Now the Arabs were terrified of water. So the idea of having soldiers going out by sea was something that was unheard of. And subhanAllah, we find later on when they fought, what they did was, when they fought on the water actually, they just tied all of their ships together to make it like a floating island because they were terrified of boats, terrified of ships and things of that sort. So Rasulullah ﷺ laughed because he saw a group of his ummah, his own companions, traveling by sea, spreading Islam by sea. Now Haram, she didn't think to herself, well, if I'm a woman, that excludes me, I'm not going to be able to do it. She said, Ya Rasulullah, make dua that I'm amongst them. So the Prophet ﷺ says, Anti minhum, you're amongst them. And Haram, she travels with her husband, Ubadah ibn Samit, to Cyprus, when the Muslims conquered Cyprus. And literally, as they're getting off of the ship, as they reach Cyprus, she trips, she falls, and she dies. And Haram radiallahu anha is buried in Cyprus. Actually, her grave is still marked off in Cyprus radiallahu ta'ala anha. So, this is a very special family, Ubadah ibn Samit and Haram. And Ubadah's name comes up in hadith a lot, by the way. He's one of the frequent narrators of hadith. Now, there's a very beautiful story of Ammar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and that is under the Khilafah of Umar ibn al-Khattab, when Umar radiallahu anhu sent Amr ibn al-As, who's now a good guy, radiallahu anhu, to conquer Egypt. After the conquest, Amr radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he becomes Egypt's governor, he becomes its wali and so on and so forth, but the commander of the army was Ubadah ibn Samit, entering into Egypt. And there's a very interesting story which takes place, which shows you the attitude of Islam now. When the Muslims reached the Babylon fortress, which is today known as Coptic Cairo, okay? So that was in the year 641. The Egyptian ruler at the time, his name was Al-Muqawqis. Al-Muqawqis. And he was holed up in his fortress in Coptic Cairo, in that area, in the Babylon fortress. And Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu sent his delegation to speak to Al-Muqawqis. So Ubadah radiallahu anhu comes. Now Ubadah is a big black man. He's not just really black, he's really, really, really big. And when the delegation arrives to Al-Muqawqis and they enter the palace, Muqawqis sees Ubadah and he looks at him and he says, "Ib'idu anni dhalika al-aswad." Take this black man away from me. He says, "Waqaddimu ghayrahu liyukallimani." And put someone else to talk to me. I don't want to talk to this black man. Like, you're sending me your slave to talk to me? You know, subhanAllah, look at the racism that's in these people. He's like, don't send me the slave to talk to me. Send me one of your nobles to talk to me. The Sahaba that were with Ubadah, they responded on behalf of Ubadah. And listen to what they said. They said, "Inna hadha afdaluna ra'yan wa ilma." That this person is the best of us in opinion and in knowledge. So he's the most wise of us, he's the most knowledgeable of us. They said, "Hada sayyiduna." He is our leader, and he's the best of us, and he's the one that's been appointed over us. And he says, and they said, وَإِنَّ الْأَسْوَدَ وَالْأَبْيَضَ عِنْدَنَا سَوَاء. They said to Al-Muqawqis that the black and the white to us, the Muslims, are the same. الْأَسْوَدَ وَالْأَبْيَضَ عِنْدَنَا سَوَاء. So there is no difference amongst them. So it shows you the attitude of the Sahaba. Al-Muqawqis says, how can you accept this black man to be the best amongst you? He should be the least amongst you. So Al-Muqawqis is ridiculing Ubadah. And you know, they keep on responding, and they said that he is the one who is the best in status amongst us, the foremost amongst us, the one who's wisest, the one who's wisest, and blackness is not something that's bad amongst us. So, you know, there's nothing wrong with being black amongst us, amongst the companions. So Al-Muqawqis finally, he decides to talk to Ubadah. He says, "Come forward, O black man, ya Aswad." He said, "Come talk to me." He said, "But speak gently," he said, "because your blackness alarms me." Your blackness scares me, it alarms me. And if you speak harshly, then it's gonna alarm me even more. Now, this is really, really funny, subhanAllah, what happens next. Now, Ubadah is a huge guy. Ubadah goes forward and Ubadah says, you know, I've heard what you've said. He said, but listen, there are amongst my companions who I left behind 1,000 men who are even blacker than me. So if you're scared of my blackness, I've got 1,000 black men back there that are even blacker than me, and they'll scare you even more than me. So subhanAllah, the idea, you know, and he gives this long speech, which I'm not going to go through, but you know, this idea here that Ubadah is saying, we've got more black Sahaba back there, they're blacker than me. And Ubadah was having fun with his racism, basically. You know, that if you're alarmed by my blackness, wait till I show you the black guys I've got back over there, you know. But this shows you, subhanAllah, the attitude amongst the Sahaba that even the darkest amongst them were leading the delegations, were leading the armies and going forward in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A few more, inshaAllah ta'ala. We have a man by the name of Sa'd ibn al-Aswad, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Sa'd ibn al-Aswad, and as his name denotes, he was the son of a black man. So Sa'd ibn al-Aswad, he was an Arab from Banu Sulaym, but he had very dark complexion. And Sa'd radiallahu ta'ala anhu, we find that he was discriminated against as well when it came to marriage. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam sent him to marry the daughter of Amr ibn Wahb. And Amr ibn Wahb was an elite from Banu Thaqif. And he was someone that was of the highest class of the Arabs from Banu Thaqif. And in Jahiliyyah, he had a lot of tribalism in him. So when Sa'd went to Amr's door and he informed him that the Prophet ﷺ, you know, sent him to marry his daughter, Amr shut the door on him. His daughter, though, he overheard Sa'd come to the door and say that Rasulullah ﷺ, you know, sent him to marry her. So his daughter told him to go back and get him. So Amr went and he found Sa'd with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam stood up and he yelled at Amr for the way that he treated Sa'd. And Amr, he repented and he married his daughter to Sa'd. Now subhanAllah, just as he married his daughter to Sa'd, a battle was about to take place. So this is taking place right before a battle. Allahu alam which battle it was, the narration doesn't say. But Sa'd doesn't really get to see his wife, subhanAllah. Sa'd is going to, you know, he goes to the marketplace, he goes to the souk, he starts to buy some stuff for his marriage and so on and so forth. But then the battle starts, Sa'd proceeds and he fights in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Sa'd radiallahu ta'ala anhu was martyred before he actually even got to see her. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this hadith is authentic actually. that from Abu Lubaba, that the Prophet ﷺ, he found Sa'ad in the battlefield. And Rasulullah ﷺ, he placed the head of Sa'ad in his lap. And Rasulullah ﷺ, the tears were flowing from his eyes and his tears were falling on the face of Sa'ad radiallahu ta'ala anhu, meaning he was crying profusely. Then Abu Lubaba says the Prophet ﷺ did something strange. He looked up, he was smiling, and then he looked away. So Abu Lubaba said, I've seen you, Ya Rasulullah, do something that I've never seen you do before. First you cried, then you looked up, then you smiled, then you looked away. The Prophet ﷺ said, I cried because my beloved companion passed away. And I saw his sacrifice and his love for me. I knew how much Sa'ad loved me. He said, but when I saw his fate by Allah, I looked up and I saw him reaching al-hawd. I saw him reaching the fountain. SubhanAllah. So the Prophet ﷺ said, it's a fountain that if a person drinks from it, they will never be thirsty again. It's sweeter than honey and whiter than milk. And he said, and I saw his status by Allah and I began to smile. He said, then I saw him enter Jannah. Then I saw his spouse from Jannah approach him, so I looked away. SubhanAllah. So the Prophet ﷺ saw this man's entire entrance into Jannah. Again, a man that hated himself because of his skin color, a man that was down on himself and that was treated the way that he was treated. And we can even find narrations where Sa'ad is hating himself. He's saying to the Prophet ﷺ, he's complaining about his skin color, and Rasulullah ﷺ is assuring him that there is nothing wrong with his skin color. This was also something that we find with the very famous story of Julaybib radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And Julaybib, obviously there's a video online, that called The Ugliest Sahabi, and I talk in detail about Julaybib radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Julaybib literally means the deformed one. And Julaybib, his description, Dhahabi says, Qasir wa faqir wa damim. He was deformed, he was short, he was poor, and qabih al-wajh, he had a very, not a very nice appearance. His lineage was unknown, and he had the darkest of skin. SubhanAllah, talk about a tragedy, right? He's deformed, he has dark skin, he has no parents. So what is society going to do to this man? In that time. So Hamad ibn Salama says that Julaybib, before the ayat of hijab, he didn't even have a name. He was Julaybib. Julaybib, the deformed one, was his name. And Hamad ibn Salama says before the ayat were revealed, he used to sit amongst the women. Before the ayat of hijab were revealed, he used to sit amongst the women to avoid being bullied, because the men were harsh with him. So he would sit amongst the women before they had to observe hijab from him. And no one would consider him for marriage. No one used to treat him justly, except the Prophet ﷺ. He used to pay special attention to Julaybib. And Hamad says that Rasulullah ﷺ used to always recognize Julaybib in the gathering. He used to be walking with Julaybib. And the Prophet ﷺ, he went to the father of a beautiful, righteous woman, and he said to him, Inni uridu an atazawwaj ibnatak. I want to marry your daughter, or I want, when you say it in Arabic, I want to get your daughter married, basically. But most likely it means that I want to marry your daughter. So when the Prophet ﷺ comes to your house and says, I want to marry your daughter, it's like the greatest thing that can ever happen to you. So he starts to celebrate. Yeah, mashallah, of course. He says, La uriduha li nafsi. He said, well, I don't want her for myself. Uriduha li Julaybib. I actually want her for Julaybib. So the house just went from celebration to, are you serious? To marrying the Prophet ﷺ, to marrying Julaybib, a man with the darkest of skin, a man that was deformed, a man that had no lineage, and so on and so forth. You want our righteous, beautiful daughter with great lineage to marry him? So he said, let me talk to her mom. The father said, let me talk to her mom. So the father goes to the mom and says that the Prophet ﷺ wants to marry off our daughter. So she says, oh, mashallah, ahlan wa sahlan, that's wonderful. He says, no. La yuriduha li nafsihi. He doesn't want her for himself. وَلَكِنْ يُرِيدُهَا لِجُلَيْبِيب. He wants her for Julaybib. The mother starts to scream, Julaybib? 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 She's screaming the whole night, Julaybib, like, are you serious? And he said, she said, Wallahi, la'amrullahi la nuzawwiju, which is haram. She swore by the years of Allah, like the age of Allah, that we will not marry him to her. Not gonna happen. Now the daughter was a righteous girl. She heard the parents fighting over this and she said, what's going on? And she said, أَتَرُدُّونَ عَلَى رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمْ أَمْرًا? Are you going to reject a command of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم? She says, ادفعوني إليه فإنه لم يضيعني. She said, go ahead and marry me to him because the Prophet ﷺ is not going to put me in a bad situation. If the Prophet ﷺ said to marry Julaybib, then I will marry Julaybib. Now subhanAllah, Julaybib here is going to marry this beautiful, righteous woman of noble lineage. He doesn't even have any money. Guess who pays his mahar? Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu pays his mahar for him. So the community kind of rallies around him to take care of him. Now, because he has no tribe, in one of the battles, the Prophet ﷺ, after every battle, he used to call out and to gather everyone together to count their casualties. He would say, "Hal tafqidun ahad?" Are you missing anybody? So every tribe would look around, kind of account for their family members and their tribesmen, and then they would say, "We're good. We all have our people." So the Prophet ﷺ kept saying, "Hal tafqidun ahad?" Is anyone missing anyone? Is anyone missing anyone? Until the Prophet ﷺ says, "Lakinni afqidu Julaybib." I'm missing Julaybib. Subhanallah, like everyone else is missing their tribesmen or not missing their tribesmen and family members, but I'm missing mine. I'm missing Julaybib. And so he looks through the battlefield to try to find Julaybib, and the Prophet ﷺ finds Julaybib dead with 7 men from the opposing army around him. Meaning Julaybib killed 7 before he was killed. So the Prophet ﷺ says, Allahu Akbar, qatala sab'atan wa qatalu. That, subhanAllah, look at him. In his stature, with his situation, he killed 7 and they killed him. And the Prophet ﷺ, he cried, and Rasulullah ﷺ, he picked him up with his own arms, because Julaybib was very small. And Rasulullah ﷺ says, Allahumma hadha minni wa ana min. Hadha minni wa ana min. Oh Allah, this one is from me and I am from him. SubhanAllah. So Rasulullah ﷺ is saying he might not have anyone in this world, but he is from me and I am from him. And Rasulullah ﷺ himself dug his grave and he placed Julaybib in and he buried Julaybib radiallahu ta'ala. So, Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala says that if a person was to achieve every nobility in the world, every station in the world, and have all the wealth in the world, they would not achieve the nobility of Julaybib just by the statement of the Prophet ﷺ saying, هَذَا minni wa ana min. I am from him and he is from me. Subhanallah. There are multiple other companions, and I'll just quickly mention some of their names. One of them is the famous Sahabi by the name of Abu Bakr radiyallahu anhu. You'll frequently find his name in hadith literature. Not Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, but rather Abu Bakr. And he was the freed slave of Harith al-Thaqafi from Ta'if. The freed slave of Harith al-Thaqafi from Ta'if by the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself freed him. He was a great student. He was a scholar of hadith. He was a alim amongst the Sahaba and the Tabi'een. Al-Hasan al-Basri rahimahullah ta'ala, who is the greatest scholar of the Tabi'een, he said that Abu Bakr was the greatest scholar amongst the Sahaba in Basra. So Abu Bakr taught Hasan al-Basri and many of the Tabi'een, and his son, Abu Bakr's son, also became the governor of Basra. So again, a former black slave family, he goes and he becomes a governor of one of the centers in the Muslim world. We also find others like Abdullah ibn Samit, the brother of Ubadat ibn Samit. Zufar radiyallahu anha. Who is Zufar? Zufar, Sa'ira al-Asadiyya. Many of you have heard her story, very few know her name. Zufar is the woman that came to the Prophet ﷺ and complained that she had epilepsy, that she kept having seizures. And she asked the Prophet ﷺ to cure her. And Rasulullah ﷺ said, if you want, I can make dua and Allah will cure you, or you can be patient and you have Jannah assured for you. And she said, Ya Rasulullah, can you at least, I'll be patient and I'll take Jannah, but can you make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that when I have a seizure and when I fall, atakashaf, sometimes my hijab comes, sometimes some of my awrah is exposed. So can you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to at least conceal me when I fall? So the Prophet ﷺ says, Laki dhalik. So the Prophet ﷺ made dua for her, that when she falls or she has a seizure, that she remains concealed. But due to her patience, she was assured Jannah by the Prophet ﷺ. You also have Muhammad ibn Maslama, radiyallahu anhu. Muhammad ibn Maslama was was a governor under every one of the khulafa. And he was the bodyguard of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was black, he was non-Arab, and he was in Medina. He's considered from the Ansar. So this man served as a governor under all of the Khulafa al-Rashideen, and again was the bodyguard of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And by the way, sometimes even the darker skin is attributed to famous, like Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu was noted to have dark skin. So sometimes it's not necessarily someone that was a black companion per se, but someone that might have just had dark skin. We have Mihjan. Mihjan was the woman that used to clean the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ. That the Prophet ﷺ came one day and he didn't find her. And Rasulullah ﷺ said, what happened to her? And they said, Ya Rasulullah, she passed away. And we buried her. We didn't want to disturb you. We prayed janazah on her and buried her. And Rasulullah ﷺ insisted to go and pray janazah on her. And he said that these graves are lit up by virtue of my salah for them. So subhanAllah, we have Mihjan. And we have many after the Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ, and we find that it became a tradition, subhanAllah, to free slaves and to turn them into ulama, to turn them into scholars. Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu had a tradition to basically free slaves and turn them into ulama. So the most famous scholars of tafsir, Ikramah, freed slave. Mujahid, the first one to author a tafsir in Islam, freed slave. Okay? Sa'id ibn al-Jubayr comes from a family of slaves. Ata ibn Abi Rabah, family of slaves, and was a freed slave. So Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu used to actually go and purchase the freedom of slaves and then teach them and make them ulama, make them scholars. We find this from Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, and I simply point people to the Abadila series, which is on BTV, where we talked about Nafi' Mawla Abdullah ibn Umar. Nafi', the freed slave of Abdullah ibn Umar, becomes one of the greatest scholars of Islam. He is the teacher of Imam Malik rahimahullah. And the golden chain of hadith in Islam is from Nafi' radiallahu ta'ala anhu, from Malik to Nafi' to Ibn Umar to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The most authentic chain of hadith in Islam includes a freed slave, Nafi' radiallahu ta'ala anhu. The first, and by the way, we find that Nafi', his contribution is not just in hadith, the hadith of Ibn Umar. He's basically responsible for the fiqh of Imam Malik. He's also, he's considered like the founder of Warsh and Qalun in Qira'at. He's like in the chain of narration of the recitation of Warsh and Qalun. So he plays a role in every single science in Islam. The first mufti of Mecca was Ata ibn Abi Rabah, who was a blind man from Sudan, from southern Africa, a dark blind man, and he was actually half paralyzed. SubhanAllah, the first mufti of Mecca from the Tabi'een was Ata ibn Abi Rabah. Sa'id ibn al-Jubayr radiallahu ta'ala anhu, also a non-Arab from family of slaves that advanced the religion. After them, we find some of the most famous names in Islam, Al-Imam al-Qarafi, Al-Imam al-Qayrawani, most of the Maliki scholars, many of the students of Imam al-Suyuti, of course in Africa, very famous for his da'wah, Uthman dan Fadio. Ibn Battuta was black, the famous traveler. And by the way, they weren't all just freed slaves that were treated equally. Tariq ibn Ziyad, rahimahullah ta'ala, the great conqueror who spread Islam, throughout Spain and so on and so forth. Also, we're talking about black Muslims of North Africa, from the Moors of North Africa. So the names are endless, and the point of this, obviously, this class was just to give you this overview of what early black history was, or in these lives of the Sahaba and in early Islam. And we can see that this tradition, walillah alhamd, continued throughout our tradition. And perhaps the strongest refutation to racism in Islam was the position that the Prophet ﷺ put various people in this religion. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to gather us with the righteous and to make us a people of taqwa, and to forgive us for our shortcomings, and to gather us with the Prophet ﷺ and Bilal radiallahu ta'ala anhu and Ayman and Zayd and all of these great companions in the highest level of Jannat al-Firdaus. Allahumma ameen. Jazakum Allahu khairan. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.